and to put it in context, I follow Devin Erickson and, back and forth the ideas of society and whose role is what. And so he was talking about um, children and adults and how like the left views government as sort of a parent figure, whereas the right doesn't so much. And my argument is, and here I'll go down and read the tweet for you, is kind of both left and right are wrong. Because we're supposed to have as separate entities, government and society. So in going to work, women abdicated their responsibility to society en masse. The government isn't meant to do the work of women. It can't do our work. We're supposed to be the soft hand of society that intervenes before program or problems go on the record. And we do that by caring. So gossip and shame had a purpose in society. Women used both to fix problems before they got out of hand. So if little Johnny down the street was shoplifting, women would tell each other about it and then use gossip and shame against his parents to force them to reform so that Johnny didn't graduate to armed robbery. Women weren't just sitting in their homes with their own children. They were aware of their neighbors and communities at a level of detail that the government will never be able to match. If men are supposed to be the watchers on the walls, somebody has got to keep an eye on the people inside. And so when we talk about society and government, they aren't interchangeable. Just like in a family, we need the softer, more forgiving authority of a mother to shepherd the public and define what behavior is acceptable and unacceptable. And when that softer hand fails, then it becomes a matter of force, arrest, courts, permanent records. I hate the chattel theory of history because it assumes if achievement isn't recorded, it didn't happen. By definition, most of women's contributions to society were invisible because they occurred before a public record was required. And there's no doubt that gossip and shame can be used maliciously, but reputation matters. People need to know who can be trusted. And women were the eyes on the ground who knew who was beating his wife, who was cheating on her, who abused their kids, stole from work, left the dog tied up outside in all weathers. And the lowest level, most painless intervention to nip those behaviors in the bud is to gossip about it. But women were convinced that contribution was worthless because nobody wrote it down. That work wasn't valuable unless it was noted on an HR payroll. That contributions to culture and civilization only matter if there's a name attached to them. And we have so thoroughly abandoned our historical role in our own civilization, we don't even remember that it was ours. And the state of our communities is about what you'd expect as a result.
Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you. Welcome to the party, pal. This is Fountainhead Forum 266. I love to promote creative people on here, and I'm talking to Melissa Cave, who is a novelist, and she's just has one novel out called Trader's Son, which is also part of her series. What's the name of the series you're starting, Melissa?
Empire of the Stars.
Oh, yeah, Empire of the Stars. Yeah. And she's a smart lady I encountered on Twitter who we like some of the same people, so I figured I'd bring her on and see what we're going to talk about. Some mainly relationship issues between men and women, which is always a favorite topic of mine. Melissa had a really great tweet recently on this topic, so I thought I'd share that with you all. So anyway, so how are you, Melissa?
Not too bad on a Friday.
Yeah. So first of all, what inspired you to write your novel, Trader's Son?
So I've always been a writer, and this one kind of combined a lot of influences and interests that I have. So it's a fantasy series, basically like Knights on a Frontier. I'm a big fan of Louis L'Amour, and a lot of his books talk about what it takes to build society. Like you get a town in the middle of nowhere, and how does it survive all of the various dangers that beset it? And so taking that into a fantasy world and taking it with knights after a war, because I'm a veteran, I went to Iraq in 2008 to 2009. The idea of dealing with post-war and the promise of building a new civilization, all of those themes and ideas are really important to me. So, and then as an avid fan of fantasy and romance, because that's how families start, it all kind of came together into this world of like hope after disaster has occurred.
That is true, though. I think a lot of people who get into science fiction and fantasy really do want to build their own world. So they can't, it's not very easy to do it in the real life, but you can create your own ideal world in fantasy or sci-fi. It's a, you said Louis L'Amour has inspired you, though. He's more of a Western writer, I believe, right?
Yeah. So huge fan of his Sackett saga.
Yeah.
And he always mentioned, because I started reading him when I was like 10 years old, and he always had a great respect for reading and literacy. And like that was a major turning point for a lot of his characters, was the importance of being well read. And then as they learned to read, they mostly read Blackstone over and over again, who was talking about the social compact and law and like how people get together in a civil society. And so it's been fun to play with that in a medieval environment.
Yeah, the Louis L'Amour Sackett series. Yeah, he's one of the biggest Western writers of all time. I've not read him, but I remember when I was 12 years old, I knew there was a guy in my science class. Every time he sat beside me, every time he had free time, he'd he'd open up a Louis L'Amour book. I always saw him with a Louis L'Amour book because, yeah, there's a lot of books there. That's something too, you get kids, I guess, because they have more time, they end up reading a whole lot of series. So it's not necessarily that high a level if a 10-year-old can read it, but it's still something that is popular with adults. Anything else that really inspired you? Or
so with this series in particular, I'd say David Gemmell is a big inspiration. Jacqueline Carey, who wrote the Cushiel's Legacy series, just her world building is spectacular. And I guess just the things that I'm interested in, like I love city building games. And so this is an actual medieval city builder. Like a big part of it is the building of the city and like the medieval techniques that are used. Because I watched a YouTube video for like 3 hours of an experiment in France where they're building a castle with actual medieval techniques, all the tools and everything. And so it makes you realize how clever our ancestors were. Just something as simple as making rope, like the tools that they had to make rope was so clever and so ingenious. And so a big part of the series is actually the building of the city and the town and how they did it.
yeah, it is kind of amazing. And even if you go back further, you think about something like the pyramids. I mean, geez, how did they build something like this without all the machinery? Or coming in the Western Hemisphere, you look at something like Machu Picchu. It's some of these things are really quite amazing what they did. Fantasy, if you're dealing with things like historical, there's always a lot of challenges there because you really got to research if you're going back in time, you got to research the time and, what people did and things like that and how they really lived. It's a lot of work.
Yeah. And that's one of my interests has always been history. And like one of my hobby horses too is like when we approach history and like how our ancestors did things and why they did them that way. There's been a lot of arrogant presumption in sort of modernity that like we know better and they were stupid for thinking the way they did. And, they just didn't know any better. Their superstitions didn't make any sense and they were foolish people because it was a long time ago and they were all stupid. And like, that's arrogant to assume with people today. Like if it would be a much healthier society if we looked at each other and said, okay, let's assume that you're not stupid, crazy, or malevolent. And you tell me why you think what you think. And it's the same thing with our ancestors. Like, they say never attribute to malice what could be explained by stupidity. Well, don't always assume that the stupidity is theirs either. It might be that you don't understand why they did it a particular way. And so I try to take that in, like, obviously it's a fantasy world and there is some things that I do that just aren't possible because it's fantasy. But when I'm looking at, a medieval inspired place, I try to do the same thing. Like, why do they do it in this way? Like, it made sense to them. There's a reason for it. So what might it be?
Melissa, anymore, that kind of arrogance can go back to things that were even happening 50 years ago. I mean, it really does. And I do think modernity has this automatic assumption that newer is always better. And, one of my soapboxes that I don't like to get on is I think so much of the so-called wealth we have is what I call superficial technology. And it's just like stuff like electric pencil sharpeners or power windows on the car. And it's like, what does that really improve our lives at all? I mean, Not really, but we have it, So I mean, certainly I think we can agree that things like penicillin and, heart transplants have improved our lives, but some of this stuff is just, it's, who cares, really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's like they say, what are the actual new inventions or the revolutionary inventions? Like the most revolutionary in my lifetime has been the internet.
Yep.
But aside from that, like, we had the refrigerators, TVs, cars, planes, all in rapid succession. And those fundamentally changed everything about the world and gave us the ability to do things that we couldn't do before. Whereas everything since then, like if you took somebody from 1940 and stuck them in my living room, it would not be that unfamiliar to them. Whereas if you took somebody from 1840 and stuck them in a 1940 living room, it would be an entirely insane new world to them.
Yeah, it's this. I think we've outlawed technology to a certain extent. So, it seems like we've slowed down. I don't know how we get it back. So what? Tell us a little bit about your story. And the world you're building here. What are some of the characteristics? What do you think makes it interesting to people? Why would people want to read your book?
So, well, for one thing, it's a reconstruction of heroes. I think we've had enough of deconstruction of heroes. I've got real heroes that want to do good, and it's kind of got a classical feel. Like I'm a big fan of Louisa May Alcott. She wrote Little Women and then a bunch of stories. Yeah, Civil War era. And I think people are tired of reading about bad people or mean people doing bad things or nothing, like nihilism. I think people are tired of that. So this is a story about people who have survived loss and tragedy and catastrophe. Like that's already occurred and they're still dealing with the fallout. And they're all trying to do the best they can. And then there is a lot of, without giving too much away, because I've actually written the first 6 books of the series. I wanted to do that before I published because I didn't want to get thrown off like certain other fantasy authors have. So without giving too much, it does build to more politics, more conflict and things like that. But it's still sort of assuming that the good people are going to win at the end and making you curious about how they're going to get there when things look so hopeless.
Yeah. And, there's another benefit to that. When you're writing a series, you can still go back and change things in a previous book if you haven't published it, because you might find you want to do that. But once the book's out, you can't change it. It's because you're doing all the publishing on your own, which is what a lot of people are doing, and yeah, which I think is the way to go nowadays. But so I haven't really noticed much what I would call deconstruction of heroes, but I do find it interesting that I have to have somebody that I can root for in a story. It's, and if there's nobody I can root for, I just like, who care? I don't care. I have to, and maybe it's a few people, but a lot. I know a lot of people, raved about, the TV series Breaking Bad, which I thought was a very well done series, but it's like, this is just a guy who's, going to the dark side gradually. And it's like, okay, this isn't really heroic, is it? But he's kind of presented as the hero. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, I've watched Breaking Bad. No, and I'm thinking of like, especially Marvel heroes and stuff like that. They've either killed off or replaced all of the heroes there. Yeah. All of our traditional folk heroes have been revealed to be actually villains. Like none of our I'm an American, so speaking to an international audience, like all of our traditional heroes and the things that we traditionally revered are, they weren't that great. They were villains. Like, I think people are tired of that. They want to hear about good people again.
I do think they want, I do think they want their heroes to be, I do think sometimes if the hero has 1 or 2 flaws, it makes them seem more real, but
for sure.
But but it doesn't necessarily, come off as being it also gives people something to strive for. I mean, I've been hearing a lot of things about comic books that they're just, ripping the heroes apart, and they're trying to make them, this or that.
Well, we've got, like, you think of Lord of the Rings, obviously there were very flawed characters that found redemption in that. But it's also sort of a broader issue of, like, obviously you want some realism, otherwise you can't relate. But I'm convinced that the stories that we tell ourselves are what we become. So if we keep telling ourselves about how everybody is secretly a villain, or they weren't as good as we thought they were, or they're nothing they did matters, like this nihilism is self-reinforcing. And C.S. Lewis famously said, like, the reason that we tell children about knights and monsters is they need to believe they can conquer the monsters. And that's the sort of stories, like civilizationally, we need to tell ourselves, not sickening sweetness and light, saccharine, fake stories, but we need to tell. I mean, Lord of the Rings is a good example. It's a real story about people that had flaws and fears and still overcame because they didn't give up. And people respond to that because that's not necessarily what we see in our lives, but it's what we want to see, and we need to believe it's possible. Otherwise, like, that's bad news for your civilization. If you can't believe that the bad guys are going to be defeated, why try?
I totally agree. This is such a great way to look at it. If they can't believe that the bad guys are going to be defeated, it's, and we see that happen, in so many times, it has to be that case. If there's no hope that the bad guys will be defeated, what is the point? I agree with you. There's very much
it's demoralizing.
It really is demoralizing. Yeah. It's just like some people, that's when I've sometimes talked to people, about soaps. It's soap operas can be that way. They really are kind of, because it's often the case, where the bad guy, where it just keeps going on, that nobody ever really wins. But, you have a story where, what are some other great examples you think of heroes? I think one great hero, and I've seen the movies and I've read the books, would be Katniss Everdeen in the Hunger Games. I think she's an amazing hero. She has her flaws too, but she's still very human. The books, I think, really make her more human and go into her feelings, whereas the movies just focus on the action part of it. But
yeah, I agree. I've read the books too, and I liked, like, she has a realistic response to the world that she's living in, and like her priorities and her conflict of like wanting to protect her family and run away versus being dragged into this broader conflict. Like, that's very believable. And especially, I think, given the state of affairs of everything, I think that resounds powerfully to a lot of people because, on the one hand, you want to do what's right, but on the other hand, you've got real concerns about your family, and you want to try to stay within the boundaries to make sure that everybody's taken care of. So
what, and the one thing that I think motivates Katniss more than anything is really she really loves her dad. She the scene where she goes back to the house and she says, I had to get my father's hunting jacket, stuff like that. It's just it's so,
she still got the connection to him.
And the movie just glossed over that. The movies weren't horrible, but they didn't go into all the moral dilemmas that she faced, and I really thought that was a loss. I was kind of expecting that to happen though too.
They got more focus on the love triangle, of course, which I thought, for a love triangle, that was well executed. Normally, I despise that trope with all of my being, but like between the politics with Peeta and the family ties with, Gale. It was believable. It was understandable. It worked all right. But yeah, it would have been nice to have like some of the other more philosophical points in there in the movies.
But the fact that she was fighting for food and getting food. If I have one beef with the Hunger Games series, I really thought that Suzanne Collins should have given Gale a better ending. I mean, does he just end up a bachelor for the rest of his life, or does maybe he gets with Prim or something like that? I would have liked him. I would have liked and granted, we're giving the Hunger Games away here, but I would have liked for him to have gotten a better ending than he got. It's like he just kind of gets thrown away there. It's like, well, what happened to Gale? Gale's a really likable guy. He's certainly a guy I could root for. He
took care of his brothers and sisters as a father, like after his own father was killed with Katniss's father.
Yeah. So. Yeah, Gale should have ended up with somebody. I hated that we don't really know. It's
Yeah, if I recall correctly from the book, he went to like another district to help them rebuild. But yeah, that was it.
They're all good characters.
Yeah, and actually, I would have been maybe more interested in his story than President Snow's. I haven't even read that, just because I could not care less about President Snow's story. That they did the prequel.
I didn't read the prequels, so yeah.
No, neither did. Like, if I was going to pick any character to pick a different, tell a prequel or a sequel or their story, it would not have been him.
Yeah. Yeah. Is there, I'm curious too. What do you, also another case, of good versus evil. What do you think about Harry Potter?
I liked Harry. So I love the world more.
Yeah.
Like, that is an incredible world that J.K. Rowling built. I have a lot of respect for her as an author. The ending I didn't like so much, just from a writer's point of view. Like book 6 and 7, especially 7. Like, she introduced the Horcruxes as like the device to destroy Voldemort, and then in the last book she introduced the Deathly Hallows, and I was just like, no, you should have laid the groundwork for those. If you were going to go that way, we needed to know about, like, it needed to be hinted at in book 4. So I wasn't wild about.
I also respect any author who completely invents a new sport. I mean, that's
yes,
Quidditch. Yeah. That is awesome. You
Yeah.
invented a sport in your novel.
No, and a compelling one that hangs together. Like, I've read a lot of critiques about it and everything, but do you know how hard it is to invent an entirely new sport, explain the rules, make it visual so that everybody understands what's going on and why? Like, it takes some serious chops to do that.
Yeah. You got to be. There's definitely a lot. So what are some other examples, of great novels that you think are out there, or great stories, maybe a movie or something like that you think are inspiring,
In my world. So,
Yeah.
One that I will say is Outlander, and that gets a lot of instinctive revulsion from men who are like, ew, romance. But she does, if you read the books, like, romance is there, but it's not the primary drive of the books. Like, it's the tragedy of the Scots at Culloden. Like, she's trying to avert a tragedy and finding that the wheels of the world just will not turn that way. Like, she can see it coming. She knows what's going to happen. She's going to lose this man that she should love or should not love, but does love. And so seeing the history with that, and she does a really, again, history. I love history so much. The author does such a great job of depicting Scotland at this time, like all of the various lords and Highlanders and how they lived, and like the details of day-to-day life. And if you like that kind of thing, like, she doesn't bog it down, which is another thing. Like, when you say that you love historical novels, a lot of people imagine endless descriptions of feasts. No, if it's done well, it's fascinating. And so that's a really great example of historical novels done right.
Yeah, historical novels are so risky. One thing I've heard, if you have somebody who really knows a lot about guns, who watches a historical novel or a historical movie, and let's say the movie takes place in 1890,
mm-hmm.
and a person who really knows about guns would say, hey, wait a minute, that gun wasn't invented until 1900,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
and I sometimes will notice the same thing with songs. It's like, wait, this movie was supposed to be in 1965, but that song wasn't written until 1970. Mm-hmm. And for if somebody who like me sees that, it just kind of said, oh no, they did it wrong. It's
that drives me crazy in many, many movies. So that and military stuff. Hollywood cannot get military stuff right to save their lives.
That I can imagine. Since you were in the military, your parents were in the military. What do you think are some great military movies or books?
Well, military movies like 13 Hours, the story of Benghazi was great. Let me think.
13 Hours, yeah.
Yeah. Khan Golden is another one of my favorite authors. He tells the story of Julius Caesar and the Wars of the Roses and Genghis Khan, the story of the Mongol Empire. Yeah, and like their strategies that they used and why the Mongols were so successful. Like, I always go back to early military history. That's more interesting to me. And there is a lot of like military strategy and siege warfare in my stories, because they've got these devils that come boiling out of the forest every night, just wanting to kill. That's all they want to do, is kill and destroy. And so they're trying to figure out how to save their settlement from these devils that are threatening them every night. And so given medieval technology, like, I'm trying to figure out how to do that. And fortunately, I've got my dad, the former Marine, to be like, no, that makes no sense whatsoever. So back to the drawing board. But yeah, I love that kind of medieval strategy, and also like the humor that comes with it, because Kana Golden is great, again, at the day-to-day stuff. And so some of the stories about it, like the Mongols accidentally flooded themselves off a plane while they were trying to lay siege to a castle. Like they would hope the water would go one way, and instead it went into their camp. I'm like, fuck. So that didn't go well.
Yeah, that's pretty wild. Yeah, there's a lot of things. I mean, there's so much. Yeah, yeah.
The things that can go wrong in war are like, not only are they ugly and, violent, they can also be very, very funny.
I can imagine they can be funny. I haven't watched that many. I can't think of that many war. Well, Kelly's Heroes is one war movie I've seen. That's a pretty fun movie to watch. But
yeah, so there's another one, Ironclad, that was a story of a siege of a castle in England. I think it was Prince John, again, if I'm recalling correctly. That one had some really great medieval war tactics, including the use of greased pigs to take down a wall. Like they set pigs on fire.
I gotta ask too. What do you think of Braveheart?
But I mean, obviously not historically accurate, but that was the first rated R movie that I ever saw. So that one is deep in my heart. That had a big impact on me for a long time.
I think Braveheart also is really just, you killed my wife, I'm going to get even with you.
Mm-hmm. I think that's going to take down your entire world. It's a love story. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is a love story. And again, the sort of prejudice that people have against romance, I understand it. And I will say romance is a big component of the first book, especially because that's how a family starts. You have a romance, then you get marriage, then you get kids. But like romance and love is such a huge driver. And I think that's another thing we've lost in modern storytelling. Like if you look at a lot of modern movies and TV shows, the idea of love as a driving influence for men or women is almost forbidden. Like that nonsense Snow White storytelling that Disney's doing. Like she's not dreaming of love. They explicitly say she's not dreaming of love anymore. And like that matters. That's a huge human impulse.
Yeah, it's a very human impulse. I've got to ask you too, because this is one of my all-time favorite movies, and it's definitely a military movie, but it's not. But there's no action. Mm-hmm. You got an opinion on Mr. Roberts?
I haven't seen that one. Tell me about it.
Henry Fonda, James Cagney, last film for William Powell, and a very early film for Jack Lemmon. He's on a Navy ship, and he wants to get into the war, but they're basically just on a cargo ship that sends cargo back and forth. And he's just, it started out as a play, but he's just always having these fights with the captain. Henry Fonda Henry Fonda plays Lieutenant Douglas Roberts. It's interesting because I also think it displays masculinity in a very positive way that doesn't really, I don't know if you'd see that now anymore. It's,
well, yeah, and the more mundane aspects of war. That's another thing, is that we're so focused on the fantastic and we just can't see the sort of value in mundane life.
Yeah, and since I've seen every episode probably 3 times at least, I got to ask, what do you think about MASH?
Yeah, so as a product of its time, so I'm a little bit younger than you, so my memory of MASH is mostly like hearing the theme song as I was going to bed. But I have seen a few episodes as an adult, and I love the setting so much. Because up until that time, they didn't frequently depict the more mundane parts of war. And I'm not going to lie, I was not on the front lines behind the wire. I was doing the more mundane work of war. Yeah. And so one, it makes you feel seen, but 2, also they did a great job of sort of the moral conflicts and how you cope with the grind. Because if you're actively fighting, at least you've got that adrenaline, you've got that, you are making a difference. Whereas if you're on the back lines, obviously they're saving lives, but still you've got that daily grind of just stranger after stranger right in front of you on the bed that you're trying to take care of. And that, it wears you out in a different way. And I thought that was really compelling, as a concept, and they executed it well.
Yeah, there were some things done well. It was very, very interesting. I just can't think of anything. I'm trying to think of anything else that I really watch a lot. What do you think out there gets the military completely wrong?
Oh God. Movies. So yeah, I mean, pretty much any movie, even the ranks and stuff, especially on TV, they get the just basic military knowledge wrong, and a civilian isn't going to notice. So I understand why it's not necessarily their focus, but sometimes it's just laughable as to how wrong they get it. Guns, they get the guns wrong. They get they're not good also at the flow of a battle, like giving you an understanding of who's where and why they're doing what they're doing, which makes me really respect it when I see something that does.
I think they clearly have more and more, and I think it probably doesn't hurt that hardly anybody in Hollywood's ever been in the military anymore. I think with World War II was the last time you had any large numbers of them who were in the military. It's
yeah. No, and that's true. And that's another reason that always takes me back to Louis L'Amour, because if you read his biography, which, is at the back of every book, so I've seen his biography hundreds of times probably, he had like 24 jobs listed on the back of his book. Like he was on tramp steamers, he was a logger, he was a cowboy himself. Like he did 24 different things. And that's all. I think that's one thing that we lack, is so many people haven't ever done anything or gone anywhere or seen anything but their particular way of life. And I think if you want to be a great writer, you need to do as much and see as much and talk to as many people as possible.
Yeah. It seems like one thing I've noticed, a lot of people who are ex-military seems like they go into the area of writing spy novels and stuff like that. Have you thought about getting into that or not? I think it's just because it's kind of something they know, but
yeah, I mean, there's some of that I will say my time in the military definitely influenced what I write. And there's a lot of political intrigue in my series. Eventually, you sort of build into it because you got to have that many names and, that many connections. You can't throw them out there all at once. But there is a lot of overlap in like spycraft military fiction with veterans. And some of it is, they can sound authentic when they write it in a way that a civilian can't. And therefore it makes it easy for them to write too.
Yeah. So, you talk about building worlds, and I'd like you to read off that. This is one thing I noticed, this tweet you tweeted a few days ago. I'd like you to read that off if you can for us.
Yeah, sure. So to put it in context, I follow Devin Erickson and, back and forth the ideas of society and whose role is what. And so he was talking about children and adults and how like the left views government as sort of a parent figure, whereas the right doesn't so much. And my argument is, and here I'll go down and read the tweet for you, is kind of both left and right are wrong. Because we're supposed to have as separate entities, government and society. So in going to work, women abdicated their responsibility to society en masse. The government isn't meant to do the work of women. It can't do our work. We're supposed to be the soft hand of society that intervenes before problems go on the record. And we do that by caring. So gossip and shame had a purpose in society. Women used both to fix problems before they got out of hand. So if little Johnny down the street was shoplifting, women would tell each other about it and then use gossip and shame against his parents to force them to reform so that Johnny didn't graduate to armed robbery. Women weren't just sitting in their homes with their own children. They were aware of their neighbors and communities at a level of detail that the government will never be able to match. If men are supposed to be the watchers on the walls, somebody has got to keep an eye on the people inside. And so when we talk about society and government, they aren't interchangeable. Just like in a family, we need the softer, more forgiving authority of a mother to shepherd the public and define what behavior is acceptable and unacceptable. And when that softer hand fails, then it becomes a matter of force, arrest, courts, permanent records. I hate the chattel theory of history because it assumes if achievement isn't recorded, it didn't happen. By definition, most of women's contributions to society were invisible because they occurred before a public record was required. And there's no doubt that gossip and shame can be used maliciously, but reputation matters. People need to know who can be trusted. And women were the eyes on the ground who knew who was beating his wife, who was cheating on her, who abused their kids, stole from work, left the dog tied up outside in all weathers. And the lowest level, most painless intervention to nip those behaviors in the bud is to gossip about it. But women were convinced that contribution was worthless because nobody wrote it down. that work wasn't valuable unless it was noted on an HR payroll, that contributions to culture and civilization only matter if there's a name attached to them. And we have so thoroughly abandoned our historical role in our own civilization, we don't even remember that it was ours. And the state of our communities is about what you'd expect as a result.
Thank you. I never thought of that, but I think because I'm 53 now, I sort of saw what was left remaining of that, and there were certain roles that happened there, and I did respond, with one thing I knew, with my mother working the polls on election day. That was almost all the poll workers were housewives, and you had small precincts that maybe had 1,000 to 1,500 people living in them, and you'd walk in and you'd vote, and it was the women knew who everybody was. So
it was high trust.
Yeah, nobody asked, and I think you have to have high trust to have a free society, but how do you create a high trust society? And you've kind of just really shown how you do create a high trust society to a certain extent, or at least a higher trust society than the one we have now. It's
No, another commenter noted that we've mechanized the trust. So credit scores, background checks, all that stuff. That used to be the function of women, to know who was high trust and who, wasn't. And of course, it's not to say that men don't talk, or especially when it comes to areas of business, then men would probably know better who's cheating in business. But when it comes to personal lives and all that stuff, like gossip, we don't understand the social function of gossip, but it has one. Like, it didn't spring up by itself, and it's not always negative. And that's another thing, to go back to the idea of don't assume that we know better than previous generations. They used gossip as a social tool. And because we are so anti-shaming and we don't want anybody to feel uncomfortable ever, we don't understand that there was a social reason and a social good that resulted from gossip and shame.
Yeah, I never thought about that either. And I do think, in a way you do try it at the same time to, create a way that pushes people to being better. It's
no, and it's what I call the maternal hand in society. Like, men get involved when the maternal hand has failed, and then physical force is required. It's the same idea of wait till your father gets home. Mom has got it up to that point, and then there reaches a point where she says wait till your father gets home, and that's when things get serious. And it's the same with society.
Yeah, it's almost as if we had these solutions that were effectively non-political, but they worked. There was somebody, there was somebody, years ago in the 60s, a distant cousin of mine, was trying to take a magazine from a store. It was a magazine that he wasn't old enough to buy, so to speak. And of course, it wasn't, the lady working in the store didn't call his police. She called his mom, and that's, now I guess he got caught doing it again, and they kind of did get to a point where, look, you stop this or we will call the police. But it was, and nowadays it's just,
well, nobody's got the bandwidth to know. If women aren't in the neighborhoods aware of what's going on, then that leaves for example, Child Protective Services, that sprang up after or in tandem with the move of women back to offices. And before, and it's not to say that this is perfect, we always have to weigh, what is the maximum benefit either way. So Child Protective Services, they have more authority to intervene, but they don't have the discretion that women had. If you imagine all women at home with their children every day, aware of what's going on in their neighborhood, they know what children genuinely need help versus which children their parents are going through a bad patch. They have the discretion to identify, you need to take that child out of there versus, give the mother some extra help. And Child Protective Services, they can't be on the ground 24/7. The government cannot do that job. So there is a point where women would have to appeal to authority and say, all right, that this cannot be fixed. We've tried, we've helped, we've given all the social help that we can to this particular problem. And now it's time for an authority to intervene. but we're missing that entire step now for so many different problems, whether it's schools or charities in the area, even just maintaining the area. Like when it comes to trash on the side of the road, if women have to look at it every day, they're going to start nagging somebody to clean it up. Whereas if we're all at work every day, we're not seeing so many of these problems, and so they just don't get fixed.
Yeah, it's funny. Sometimes when I go to Mexico City, I will still see people outside their buildings sweeping the sidewalks and the streets, and I'm just like, I never see that in America. Never.
Hmm.
Actually,
Yeah.
with a broom in the street, you see that, and there's the whole, yeah, there's definitely, it's, we do live in a society also, where nobody knows their neighbors anymore. It's,
Yep.
I don't know how, and I don't think the internet had really much of anything to do with this. I think it was already collapsing before the internet came along.
Yeah, I agree. And it was because of the move to have all women working. Like it started off like as always, and this is another thing, is that we can't always assume that it was all because of evil reasons or anti-civilizational reasons. Like there were good reasons why some women wanted to go to work when this all began. But then there were social incentives for why employers would want to pay more women less money to get them in the work. And so it just sort of evolved naturally to this place for both, cultural and economical reasons. And I think it can be solved in the same way. Like there are going to be some women that want to stay in the workplace and some women that, given their druthers, would stay home with their children. And I think, we need to recognize the social good of those women being home with their children, in addition to just being a stay-at-home mom and being with their children, which I think is preferable to any childcare solution you can provide. Like the social good of just having women in the neighborhood all day, to recognize if there's a stranger around who shouldn't be, to take care of their community. And I think that with the advent of work from home, like if we can get people to stop bashing that, like that could provide a solution, because, historically, the vast majority of us worked from home. That was the model of work, was you did it from home, up until very recently. So it's possible to go back to that and put mothers in particular home with a flexible schedule so that they can provide an economic good and get some work experience for when the kids are older, then we should support that in every way we can. So the good news is, if we identify this as a problem, we're getting to the point where technology can also provide a solution, in my opinion.
Yeah, there's another thing too, where Rachel Wilson, I remember, and I don't always agree with her, but she sent out a tweet, about how I'm home and therefore I always know what my kids are eating.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't just go buy my kids Pop-Tarts, or I make them actual meals.
Yep.
And not to mention it ends up saving you a lot of money. But now, I mean, people, there was a time, where first of all, almost everything was a full-fledged restaurant where you sat down and,
yeah,
eat. I mean, people spend, so many times now people are paying somebody else for their, to prepare their food for them. It's,
mm-hmm.
and I don't necessarily see that as an improvement either. It's,
no. Well, and, we tend to, anytime you start bringing up stay-at-home moms in particular and like women's role in society, people always want to try to cast it as like a longing to go back to the 1950s. And like, I think it doesn't have to be, by recognizing things like you say, diet, as being an additional good of having mothers in the home doing the cooking instead of always going out or always ordering in. Then we sort of understand what we lost a little better, and then what we're going for when we try to fix things. Because if you don't understand why things were the way they were, then you can't figure out a way forward.
Yeah, it's like the cliche, don't take the fence down until you know why somebody put the fence up. It's
No, but similarly, like, and this is a reactive tendency, is like understand why the fence is there, but also understand that there are fences behind that fence. Like there was a problem that we were trying to solve by making it easier for women to go to work. And we need to understand like the real breadth of what that problem was. Because there were, again, like you talk about like the feminine mystique from the 1960s, where you're talking, the popular feminist idea that women were living lives of quiet desperation, unfulfilled, not able to reach their full potential, this, that, and the other. Like maybe there were some women that felt that way, but do we have any way to know how many? And so, one, you don't want to propose a solution that destroys everybody else. Because, like, again, there are women that want to be stay at home moms and they can't right now because of society. So, the solution that we had to the couple quietly desperate women of the 1960s was to smash the whole structure. So, we need to understand the problems, but also the scope of the problem. Like, how big of a problem was that really?
Well, my whole take is that almost all of this was promoted by communists, and history bears me out. They almost all wanted to, and they realized that the family stood in the way of that.
Yeah. No, that's a big part of it. Like I'm aware of, what was his name? Yuri Brezhnev or something like that.
Yuri Bezimov, yeah.
Yeah, I've seen the video.
Yeah, that's an amazing video. Yeah, I think it all was that way, too. And I think, but yeah, I mean, I had my parents, got married in the 50s, and my grandparents were a lot older than that. So I saw how things, I mean, I had one grandmother who never even learned to drive a car, and that wasn't for her. Being born in 1900, that age bracket, it wasn't unusual that a woman might never learn to drive the car because, it was certain jobs that, men didn't, there's just that certain generation too, where, where the men always cut the grass too, that was another thing that.
Yeah. Well, and there's also the understanding, or there was an understanding, that men and women are supposed to be complementary, not competing. And that's something, again, without, mentioning my book a billion times, but that is something that I tried to explore a lot, because in a medieval society, you've got very gendered roles, and they were gendered for very good reasons. And, when you translate that to the modern world, there's still certain things that men and women naturally do better. And while on the one hand, in the name of, liberation and fulfillment, we don't want to stop anybody from doing something they really want to do, unless it's something like, that's going to endanger other people. We need to understand, like, the odds are you will be more successful if you do this. Like, that's something, as a woman of a certain age that, I want to tell women of the younger age. It's like, there is a chance that your career will fulfill you and you will find something that is your life's purpose, and you'll be happy doing it until you're 70 and drop dead. But the odds of that are not good. Like, the odds of centering your life around work, making you completely fulfilled and happy, are not good. The odds are that you will be much happier if you center your life around family. And we've had 40, 50 years of nonsense propaganda telling women otherwise. Like, that was the environment I grew up in, was hearing that everybody has to go to work, and, like, stay at home mom is an option. But, what do you do? That's always the question. What do you do? And it's, the idea of being a mother is going to be more fulfilling to the vast majority of women, but it's not even a choice anymore. Like, the structure of society is such that you are told you have to go to college, and then you have years alone, and then you get married, and then you have kids, maybe. And when you've got all those societal impulses against you, like, it's very hard to break free.
Yeah. And, not to mention, I don't know if you're familiar with Aaron Clarey, but he pointed out that about 1/3 of women work in something that is related to childcare. And I guess that includes teaching as well. So, we've effectively taken the work. So basically, the work that mothers do is now being taxed, whereas before it wasn't taxed.
Yeah. No, and you look there, I saw on X just yesterday, somebody was posting the costs of daycare, and it's like $900 a week. That's a full-time, well-paid job for somebody. And at that point, why on earth are you even paying for somebody else to raise your child? You $4,000 a month just for daycare.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it's really becoming this and I don't think it's. Yeah, and I don't know what. I really do think it was just propaganda to. I don't know how we get back to where we were, and. Yeah.
That's so. One is understanding why, or what we had and the benefits of it. And two is, like I said, we have the opportunity for telework. And in this case, like I do have many libertarian impulses, but I do think that paying stay-at-home mothers to at least to begin establishing a stay-home mother community, um, government benefit, I think that is going to be our only solution, because it's not just a matter of an individual mother deciding to stay home. It's the community of mothers, if you will. Like, that's what's missing. And that's one reason why I think those women that do stay at home, like, they have to make a concerted effort to go out and find other women to talk with, get their kids socialized with, et cetera, because they can't just walk out the door anymore. And so a lot of them will find it lonely and want to go back to work, because that's not the model that it's supposed to be either. You're not supposed to just sit at home inside your house all day every day with your kids. Like, that's not what it was either. You used to go out, you would run errands, you would talk to other women, you would babysit each other's kids, you would look after all the other people in the neighborhood. And so we need more of them in the neighborhood so that they can get to know each other and start building that culture again. So again, normally I'm very libertarian in my impulses, but if we're serious that this is a social good, which I think it is, then I think it's going to take, I don't see any other way for it to happen than to use government force or incentives.
Well, one incentive would be to raise the deduction for dependent children on your taxes. Yeah. That's not kept pace with inflation at all. The other thing too, though, that sprung out of all this too is, we also had a marriage culture. Now we have a divorce culture, and we have now just a culture that I don't think could possibly be worse than it is right now.
Well, we had a culture that knew how to manage romance and marriage. Like, again, something else that I discuss in my book is like how people end up courting and paired off. One, understanding that it needs to happen and it's like inevitable. Like, we had a culture at one point that understood there was no question that you were going to get married. Everybody got married. It was just the next stage of life. And then everything was bent in the direction of making that happen. Like, you had friends setting you up on blind dates. You had your mother nagging you to death and, sending her friends' sons over to meet you. Like, there was 1,000 different ways aside from random meetups in bars where people might meet each other and then get paired off and get married. And there was also the understanding, like, since marriage is for life, then you are expected to get over your problems. And, this is something where, again, I don't think feminism was purely ideological, because you get women that were in genuinely terrible situations. There needs to be some sort of protection for that. And if you have stay-at-home mothers who aren't working and therefore can't support themselves because they don't have any work experience, like, that is another problem that somebody needs to fix. So this is not purely, a crusade to destroy the family. But, we need to compensate for those things when we're looking at reorienting our society toward marriage, because everything that would have propelled it before has been torn away.
Yeah, everything would have prepared. That's true, and I mean, how did people? How did I mean? I don't know how the system worked when my parents got together, but I just know that it did work.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if you really know how the system worked. It's.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it evolved over time, but even if you go back as far as thinking of the Victorians and stuff like that, and this is one of the things when you talk about the chattel theory of history, women as, chattel of their husbands, helpless victims throughout the entirety of history. It's so despicable. It's such a lie against men and women. Because if you go back even as far as the Victorian age, and you think about the rituals of courtship and how men and women were introduced to each other, and their bona fides checked, so everybody knows who this is. Men would be the ones that would, tell their daughter, no, you cannot see him because he's a jerk. And the women were the ones that denied the jerks the house. Like, again, when you're talking about, social reputation and things like that, if they know that this particular young man has gotten a lot of young women in trouble and left them high and dry, then there comes a point where society says he's not allowed in the house. He cannot come to our functions. And so you screen out the bad actors from the dating pool. And then again, you get the hard hand of the father eventually saying that, you are not good enough to see my daughter. You do not have my permission to marry her. I have reviewed your finances, this, that, and the other. You're not prepared to support a wife. Go back, do better. Maybe you can try again. And so, these two functions in tandem made it more likely that women aren't going to run off at a young age with somebody that can't support her and set them up for a lifetime of misery. And, going forward through history, it's another reason why we need to ask ourselves why we have these leftover rituals of asking the father for his daughter's hand in marriage. Like, that wasn't a patriarchal, oppressive man controlling his daughter's sexuality. That was a father investigating the potential lifetime partner of his child to make sure that he was worthy and he was capable of taking care of her. And at 18, 19, 20, 21 years old, a young woman can be very easily deceived and taken advantage of. And so all of these structures that we used to have, one, to introduce one to the other, and two, to make sure that the match was a good one, were not oppressive, but we tore them all down.
Oh yeah, definitely. There's a lot of things, in the new world. One thing I always say too, and I would tell, if I knew a single woman who has a dog, and the dog doesn't like the boyfriend, I'm just like, well, mm-hmm. He's the wrong boyfriend.
That's a sign.
Yeah,
yeah, the dog test.
I think that also goes both ways. It's but mm-hmm. And but yeah, there's a lot of things out there too, and I think. Yeah, as you, in many respects, you do agree with the adage that, that it does take a village to raise a child, not the government, but in this
exactly.
case, villages did actually raise the kids. It's a
society that we need to understand society as a separate entity of government. Government cannot do that job. Yeah. So absolutely.
Yeah. And that of course, that's been corrupted now too. Now it's like, the government has to do all this stuff. And the government the government as a parent is just a complete disaster,
Mm-hmm. Well, that's not what it's functioned. That's not what it's supposed to do.
Yeah. And I don't know how we get away from that. What do you think, nowadays too, you hear about things like, helicopter parenting, so to speak, and just, in some cases, the mother who smothers their kid a little bit too much, doesn't.
Yeah.
Because when we were growing up, growing up in the 70s and 80s, we still got to do a whole lot of things, and we did a lot of things,
Yeah.
And but even I remember my older brothers would complain that they would say, well, we did more, like they would go, and now you hear, my mother once left me in the car with the motor running, but now,
mm-hmm.
You hear stories about
that'll get you arrested.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. I don't know. How do we stop that? I'm afraid to answer that question.
Yeah, there's so many different influences and reasons for why we've ended up where we are with that. And like you, I was born in the 80s, and I grew up on military bases, which is even safer. And so we would just go out of the house. We joked about setting our belly buttons to come back at lunchtime, and so that we'd get hungry and come home and then go right back out again till dinner time. And nobody watched us. We wandered the woods all over the place. More than once, the military police brought us back walking in front of their cars because we wandered somewhere we shouldn't have. That was how I grew up. And one, you have the trust of the community. And two, we had younger parents who had more children. I agree with Jordan Peterson that if you have a couple kids or one kid late in your life, then that one child is too precious. You've got entirely too much time and attention to devote to them to make sure that not one single thing will happen to them. Whereas if you got 8, you don't have the bandwidth to watch every single thing they do. And I'm not saying we should have 8, but you got more. That's just what happens. And then 3, with the internet and global news, that is more destructive to social trust and cohesion than just about anything else we could do, because we are constantly hearing about disasters with no scope for or no way to gauge how dangerous a thing actually is. I watch a lot of videos on Japan, and they've got a tradition where I think the kids are 3 years old when they go on their first errand. And so they walk out of the house. This little 3-year-old is given a little bit of money. They walk out of the house by themselves, go down to the store, buy something, and come home. And everybody understands that this is baby's first errand, and so they're all very understanding and watching. There's people watching the child but not following the child, and they go and they do their first errand and come home. And like, we used to do that. We are a culture that had 4-year-old boys sniping off squirrels in our frontier days. Like,
Yeah.
we vastly underestimate what our kids are capable of, but because we've got older parents whose heads are filled with horror stories, there's no social trust. And so the thought of sending out our kids on baby's first errand is just unthinkable.
Oh, I know completely. Or, because sometimes I wonder if it's, who is making these phone calls to the police. And it could very well also be, somebody who doesn't have parents. And unfortunately, as one person pointed out, the proliferation of cell phones has exacerbated this.
Oh, yeah.
If you didn't have easy access to a phone when you saw that,
you didn't have to be worried about being put on blast for every single thing you do in public.
Yeah, you didn't have to, because nowadays you could call immediately. You see that, and believe me, it's really. I think it's really sick. I saw a sign, in the Austin Library once that said, children under 10 who are unaccompanied are not allowed, will be asked to leave here. And it's like, I went to the library by myself, possibly when I was 6 years old, and I certainly also can remember going to the post office to buy stamps also at a very young age.
Yeah, my brother and sister would walk to the store all the time by ourselves.
And I don't, and the thing is, you're not learning how to be an adult. I think we probably are creating a generation of 20 somethings who are still basically teenagers, probably, or worse.
Yeah, no, they talk about that, like kids that are bringing their parents to job interviews and stuff like that because they have never been allowed to do anything independently.
Or also cases, where kids might have a problem in the dorm and they call mom and dad.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like it's really, I don't know how we reverse this. And I don't know how, I don't know whoever thought this was a good idea is the other thing.
I mean, it's a natural, there's always a question of how much is shaped and how much is just a natural evolution. And, if you've got older parents having a few kids, and also an obsessive focus on safety, like safety is a whole other thing, but the idea that nothing bad can ever be allowed to happen to anybody ever, there's no sense of proportion.
Yeah. And this was a gradual process, and it even happened, we were not allowed to leave the junior high when we were in junior high, but my brothers were, for lunch, for example. It's definitely, I do think the bureaucrats have probably promoted this a lot. And there's also so much of this, you've got to, everybody, is worried about getting sued. So they do things that are just completely absurd.
Maybe it's a natural outgrowth of civilization, because we are a problem-solving species. And so if, when I was 12 or 13 years old, there were 2 girls abducted. One went to my high school, another one went to my middle school. And obviously, in big picture United States of America statistics, this is a one-off, exceptionally bad thing that just happened to happen in my area. But the natural reaction of people, and it's understandable, there's nothing malevolent about it, is going to be, well, we need to do this, 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 and this so that it doesn't happen again. And when you've got these additional 4 things that you didn't have before. Girls are now slightly more restricted than they were before. They're watched just a little bit more carefully.
I don't understand this whole, we always got to react to every one-off that happens, because if we sit down and look at it and say, well, why do we need to change anything? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't talk about this story very often, but I was, when I was in the 6th grade, and I won't mention his name, but, I was walking home with, I'll just call him Ken. Mm-hmm. And, that fake name. But Ken and I were walking, and Ken had a little brother who unfortunately had a birth defect and ended up with had really short arms. I think his brother was maybe 3 or 4 years younger than he was.
Mm-hmm.
So as you can imagine, Ken was extremely protective of his brother. And so there was a boy, kind of in between them, who was older than his little brother, but younger than Ken, who was kind of, picking on him and just, I don't know if he was teasing him or whatever. But one time Ken took out a knife and started chasing the kid. He had a knife at school. Yeah, this would have been a much bigger deal later, but started. And then, so later, as we're walking home from school one day, Ken and I are walking home from school, that kid's older brother comes up and he's maybe a head taller than the two of us. And he pulls out a knife and says, "Did you pull a knife on my brother?"
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember this vividly, but I'm also remembering how calm I was, because the first thing that was in my head was, that knife isn't for me, but it's for him. So I wasn't
going to witness a murder.
and I knew why. I immediately knew why. Yeah, this is why this is happening. But I never said, I was 11. I was in the 6th grade, 11 years old. I never said a word to anybody about that.
Mm-hmm.
He went home and said a word to Mom, and Mom was like hauling him to school every day after that. I was just like, oh my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
I can't believe you're just like, and I'm just saying, and I just thought to myself, well, I'm glad I didn't tell my parents. It's sometimes, some kids would think that I don't want to tell my parents about this because my parents might go nuts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And there are times, where kids will keep. I've never told anybody in my family about that. It was just, and yet that was one of the few times I ever saw anything happen on the street. And I've walked around, Bogota and city and probably some not so good neighborhoods in Mexico. And yet it just,
Yeah. Well, we don't have the individual, individual sense of proportion. But the other thing is, like, when these bad things happen, we don't think about the impacts of the impacts. Like, those 4 things that happened after those girls were taken. Like, we also don't think, like, the impact on all the other children of these new measures that we've implemented.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the unseen impacts that we don't expect. Yeah. But now, we've got 20-year-olds taking their parents to work. So here's one of those unseen impacts.
So. And there are definitely some things that I'm glad, we changed. I mean, I'm glad we got rid of the old refrigerators, for example. I mean, those things were horror. Those things were, what I mean by the old refrigerators, kids would play hide and seek and they'd hide inside those refrigerators and then they couldn't get out of them. Fortunately, the refrigerators used to be like that.
Death traps.
yeah, they were that. Yeah, that was it. And it's that's one of those things too, that even without government regulation, I'd like to believe that the market would have taken care of it. But there were refrigerators. Yeah.
No, well, that was
if you were born in the 70s, you probably saw one. If you were born later, you probably haven't seen one. But yeah, they were. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I've seen a couple things on X where it's like videos of old refrigerators talking about how indestructible they are. And I'm like, well, I did not think of the downside of that indestructibility.
It's even some of the new refrigerators are good, but they definitely had that issue because they had like these little they kind of locked so they couldn't
be opened from the inside.
You couldn't just push them open. Yeah. And, and they finally did something with trunks too on cars. Why they didn't do that long ago, I have no idea. But, it's
pressure.
You certainly, it's one of those things it cost them like $10 to do. And it just had to put a little latch inside the trunk. I mean, they could have done this 70 years ago.
That was another thing I saw on X. Like there was a recent uproar and I don't remember her name. It was in Congress where they were talking about how we need to support female crash test dummies. And so I don't know if you heard about that or not. It was like a big thing for a day. And so as this sort of gendered thing that we need to support for diversity reasons. And my question is, one, why do we need to pay somebody something for that they should be doing already? Like if they aren't testing cars on female crash test dummies just to make sure that the anatomy reacts all the same, like just make them put a big sticker on the car saying this has not been tested on females and the problem will sort itself. Why do we always need to resort to the government having some stupid program to get people to do things that odds are the market would correct itself if the government didn't intervene?
Yeah, the market does correct those things, Are there any other, are there any other things you've noticed too, that have happened? I think, I mean, I don't know what you could comment on the dating culture. I certainly have my own take though. And I think I don't think it could possibly be any worse than it is right now. I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think it's, the common wisdom is that it's kind of hopeless. And I don't get much mileage out of noting the ways that it's hopeless. Like we can sit here for hours and talk about how this is bad and how it used to be better and this, that, and the other. And like, in terms of ways to fix it, that's what I've been thinking of, like taking the wisdom of the past, understanding why we did the things that we did, and then trying to figure out a way that we could fix it for the future. One of them is by depicting romance in media. We need to get back to showing it as a good thing in movies and books. We need to get back to showing families in movies and books. Like you see those posts on Twitter all the time of somebody with their new baby. And it's like, statistically, if you show a young woman a baby, like, or an assortment of young women a baby, within X number of months, half of them are going to be pregnant. And don't quote me on the statistic, but there is like a real impact just of showing a baby to a young woman. And so things like that, like, again, the problem will sort itself out in some ways. I think there's things that the government could do, such as supporting families better. But there's also other incentives that you can show culturally, societally, that would change the incentives and make people sort of figure out the problem for themselves.
Yeah, if you for example, if you have an office where a lot of women are working, the surest way to create a work stoppage is somebody walks in with a baby.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and if you take your baby into the office, then there's going to be a number of women in there that are like, the biological clock starts ticking.
Yeah.
So, but
what
men
do you think
also. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Right. What do you think are some great examples of romance?
So, I try to think of modern ones. Like the Outlander is a good one in terms of the book. I haven't followed the show past the first season. But older ones, like I'm trying to think in pop culture, we used to have so many family sitcoms. Like I would have to go back 20 or 30 years to think of family sitcoms where, a family lifestyle was shown as a positive thing. I've heard of that one that Tim Allen did that was well received recently, like Last Man Standing. Yeah, no, Last Man Standing. That was after Home Improvement. Yeah. But in terms of showing a good, I'd have to go to anime in order to find good examples of families. Like Spy Family, that one is adorable. That one will make you want to have children. But in terms of Western media, I would have a hard time thinking of anything more recent than the 90s.
Yeah, I never thought of anime yet, but that's interesting too because I think I do enjoy a good. I think I do enjoy a good romantic comedy, too. It doesn't necessarily have to be. I mean, you remember the families, that worked, and I think maybe that's why there's still somewhat of a nostalgic feeling for some of this stuff. Is maybe kids turn on the TV and they see the Brady Bunch and they're seeing what they're kind of getting an example of what we lost.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, TV might kind of save us from that because at least it'll give us something to aspire to, Yeah. I also think that's maybe part of why so many people love It's a Wonderful Life now, because it really portrayed that old, the old society that we had,
Yeah, well, and that's one of the downfalls. Like if this was an orchestrated thing, and communism, et cetera, which I'm not going to say that wasn't a big, part of it, is that we still have this backlog of all the old good stuff. And so, we still have this reference for when times were earlier. And, short of banning all these movies, we can still see that like in the 90s, movies were better. They were more intelligent. They were better written, like in so many different ways. Better than what we have now. Because like I can't watch most modern media. It's just too stupid.
I don't watch a whole lot. I there's not a whole lot I watch either. I thought of another great, character as far as a hero is concerned. What do you think about Atticus Finch? To Kill a Mockingbird.
Yeah. Very good in a non-martial way. Like I think we need different modes of heroes, and that's a really good example of a different mode of hero. Yeah.
Not a superhero, but just a pretty ordinary guy, but he stands up for what's right, and he takes care of his kids and tries to teach them something. And that's a novel. I don't know what you find in romance or families anymore, because I think you need something that kind of makes people say, I want something like that. It's
Yeah. Well, and the thing is, like, it's regarded as uncool for men to want a family and to want kids. But there is nothing more adorable or heartwarming than watching a man play with a kid. Like every woman watching that instantly melts. And just positive depictions of stuff like that. Again, I'm deliberately trying to do that with my books, which is it's a hard sell to get men to read romance. But I think like and I'm not talking about, monster fucker porn, excuse my language, but that's the most
yes.
that's the most often I hear that objection. I'm talking about honest romance leading to a family. Like we need those examples before us to see it desirable. And I think most men do desire it. It's just a very hard thing to get to. And then also like there's a lot of downsides for men in a marriage. And until that's fixed, like out of purely practical reasons, men are going to be very leery of it.
Well, there are a lot of downsides, period, for men, nowadays. I mean, the whole culture of false accusations, which is just,
Mm-hmm.
uh, I think a lot of men are just throwing their hands up. And,
Yeah.
I know a lady who, she says, "Here, look, here are 4 things you need to do for a man. Just, men are actually very simple to figure out.
Yes.
We're not difficult at all. Just uh, be, be positive be positive, to praise us when we do good things. And,
Mm-hmm.
she just,
No, well, and it's an understanding again that men and women are supposed to be complementary, not competing.
yeah,
And so, like, one of the things in sort of writing the romance is that men will provide the physical protection and safety. And I'm convinced that the obsession with safety is due to the sort of men stepping back. And when I say that, I don't mean like they have chosen to do this or they've, completely abdicated their responsibility. But like the obsession with safety, particularly in women, is because we don't have the societal expectation of men, fathers, brothers, etc., to provide that safety that we had before, because we got rid of the patriarchy that did it. We called it patriarchy when they did it. But the other thing is like we don't understand what women brought to the other side, and like feminism now calls it emotional labor, and like we provided emotional safety for men, like not for them to cry. We don't want them to cry, but for men to come home and feel safe and at peace. Like they can go out and face the world, but they need a place where they can come home and just be. And women used to be that place, that area of grace and peace and beauty and love and home and food and all those things that just a warm, good place for men to go to after they've faced the world. And without understanding those two complementary things, like there's something fundamentally dysfunctional about the relationship.
yeah, that's exactly right. It was something that men could come home to. It's just, and the same thing, with World War II. When the boys went off to fight the war, they had to have something to come home to. And I think we're reaching a point now where men just, what would I go fight for? It's like, who
Mm-hmm.
cares? If the,
Well, severed from our land, severed from our ancestors, like there's a
yeah,
whole discussion to be had about that. Like severed from our communities. Like we wouldn't in previous days you didn't go to fight sort of for the United States, but you fought for your home, you fought for your family. And those words don't hold as much meaning as they used to.
some ways there's not really all that much to fight for. It's,
Mm-mm.
I, you didn't, what's your situation? I don't think you mentioned what your situation is.
So as far as
Do you have kids? Are you married or?
no.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's yeah. So what else do you think, I don't, but obviously your parents had a pretty good situation, or what?
Oh yeah. My parents still married, never divorced,
Yeah.
Catholic on both sides of the family. So there's not a lot of divorce in either side of the family. My personal situation is that I'm shy in person, and a lot of those structures, like I've always been an analytical person, and in previous days I would have been forced to go out and meet somebody,
Yeah.
but nobody could force me. And so I would rather sit home and read than go out and meet strangers and be uncomfortable and shy. So that's what I did. And that's good for my writing, but not good for society.
There are some men who like to go after the wallflower though too. Maybe it's because it's like, why don't you come out and I think, and maybe it's because there's a little more work involved, and they figure like maybe it'll be appreciated.
Yeah.
That's another thing too, though. There are a lot of men always who I think want to try to rescue women.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if this is something that existed in the previous days, but I can remember. Yeah, even when I was maybe 12 or 13, and it's just like, why are you with this boy who treats you like crap?
Mm-hmm.
And do you think that was an issue beforehand or not? And
I think, I love Jordan Peterson for discussions like this. I don't know how much you've listened to him at all, but
I've listened to Jordan Peterson quite a bit, but and I know
Beauty and the Beast impulse. No, it's the Beauty and the Beast impulse.
Yeah.
Because women have that desire to tame the wild thing.
Yeah.
I'm not sure why, in evolutionary terms, not sure why that is. But there is something rewarding about taking the ungettable, untamable man and making him want you and winning him over. And so that's why women go after the bad boys, because they're trying to tame him.
I don't know if that's something that was portrayed in movies, but I think it I don't know if I ever really saw it much in culture though until really around the 50s, And there was a time, if you wore a black leather jacket and blue jeans, you were a bad boy.
But it wouldn't have been permitted in earlier. I mean, I'm sure there were, the bad boys and the I know this name, Don Lotharios, Don Juans.
Don Juans.
Yeah, you had the lovers before, which that was as close to a bad boy historically that you would be the guy that loves them and leaves them. But in terms of like a bad boy that slouches around causing trouble, like there would have been much less tolerance for it historically. Like the village fathers would have beaten him up and driven him away.
Yeah, I definitely think there was. Do you think this is also possibly a small town, big city thing?
So, I mean, there's also in more recent years, the consequences for choosing the bad boy were much less dire. Like prior to birth control, like the consequences were pretty terrible because you could be stuck, with a child alone to raise it. In best case, worst case, you could be stuck to a terrible person the rest of your life who beats you and neglects you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So there was a lot more recognition on women's part that he might be fun to play with, but there's very real consequences, which after birth control, what's the consequences? He breaks your heart.
Yeah, I do think, sometimes there's also maybe just this, that women are bored, because a lot of times I'll hear some guys, said the worst thing you can do to a woman is be bored. It's because I've noticed, that characters that women are, really like in some of the popular culture I've consumed, I'm a big fan of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and some of the female fans, they like this boyfriend, they hate this other boyfriend, that kind of thing. And the one thing, the complaint about the one, well, he's boring. I don't know if maybe that created, because in a lot of cases, good men are boring.
Yeah, but you also have to deal with maturity. Like, you take a little 16-year-old, because when I was 16, Leonardo DiCaprio was the thing. And I will say to my credit, he always looked like a girl to me, even at 16 years old. But you got, there's various things that a 16-year-old or a 20-year-old is going to look at versus a more mature woman who is looking to get married. Like Leonardo was non-threatening. And then you get into the bad boys that are a thrill. And then, as you get older, then you start looking at, well, he's got a good job and we like board games and that kind of thing. But again, this is also like the role of the parents back in the day was to screen out the ones that were, screen for boring. Like, yes, he's boring, but
I when I was 16,
Mhm.
obviously not me, but the girls,
Mhm.
well, one of them, John Bon Jovi,
Yeah, yeah.
and to his credit, he has been married for 36 years.
I didn't know that. Good for
Yeah,
him.
I mean, yeah, and he married his high school sweetheart. I don't know what
Oh
happened
wow.
along the way for him, but he probably had plenty of opportunities. But
Yeah.
he's
No, that's good if he can stick it out.
yeah, 36 years in a crazy world where he's probably had.
Hmm.
I can imagine
Surrounded by God knows what. Yeah.
I can imagine all the times he's had bras and underwear thrown at him and all this other stuff. It's just it's
Yeah,
I'm
especially the 80s. Wow. You survived the 80s with your marriage intact.
he got married in 1989, so I guess
Yeah.
really he didn't. So
Yeah, I'm thinking of the big hair because I've listened to some of his more recent stuff,
yeah,
but I always think of the "You Give Love a Bad Name," etc. The big hair makeup days.
well, that was when he made the. I've never really heard of him doing anything crazy either. Anything
No,
self-destructive or anything like that. He's a 36 years. Yeah, I don't know.
yeah, anybody that makes it out of Hollywood without
4
doing
kids.
anything insane or destructive,
Yeah,
you gotta kind of applaud him for it.
yeah, 4 kids. There were well they like Tom Cruise too. Yeah, Tom
Mhm.
Cruise was still a big one. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Tom Cruise has definitely had some had his ups and downs, but yeah,
yeah, I can't get past Scientology with him. Like, I love his movies, and I think he's
yeah.
endured Hollywood better than most. But I've read enough about Scientology to be very, very skeptical.
Yeah, I think people are just looking for answers somewhere. I've
Yeah,
I've not dove into Scientology.
yeah, I go through like wild interest, and this is another um, mental quirk. Is just like I get very intensely interested in something and then read everything about it, and then move on. And Scientology was briefly one of those interests. So I've read probably a dozen biographies from various members who left the organization, and including like the daughter of the founder and the father of the founder and stuff like that. And it's a cult.
This is one thing. Well, when you mentioned Jordan Peterson, I liked Jordan Peterson a lot more 8 years ago.
Yeah.
Only because what's going on with his daughter?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's natural that once you get a platform, you want to try to give
Yeah,
opportunities to your family members. But at the same time, like, you're not going to get the same thing from Jordan Peterson's daughter that you get from Jordan Peterson.
well, I'm saying married, baby, divorced, second marriage. It's
Yeah.
I'm just like thinking, okay, how credible is your advice, Jordan? Because you've
Well,
already, and maybe that's not fair, but
yeah, you can give good advice. Doesn't mean anybody has to take it.
I don't think, and I think the fact that he really got lucky with his wife. I mean, he met her. I mean, we'd
Yeah.
all like to. I mean, I knew that I knew this couple. Graduated high school with me. I think they got together when they were 11 or something. And
Mhm.
as far as I know, they're still together. But it's. I think we all wish we could have had something like that. But most of us didn't. For whatever
Yeah.
reason.
No, well, the modern world is not shaped for it, and and specifically discourages early marriages.
Yeah.
Which I have mixed feelings on those too. That was something else that I talked about with others on X. Is like the values of an early marriage versus ones later in life. And like I think earlier marriages, and when I say that, I mean like high school sweethearts getting married right after high school, or middle college, no later than that. Like they need more support from the family and from the family to be successful. But I also think you grow together better. Whereas if you marry later, you've got a lot of living that you got to prune off in order to fit together.
Yeah. I think I sometimes will say you have to be young enough to believe in fairy tales, but but mature enough to keep it together.
Yeah.
But yeah, and if you get to this point where you're older, you just get so cynical that it gets harder because you don't.
Well, it's an underrated
Yeah,
phenomenon. Like this is the first time in history where we've had so many people, or where it's been a custom to get married so late in life. Like, that
Yeah.
is unprecedented in the history of the world. And I don't think we understand everything that follows from that. Because, I mean, the fact that you have both partners have lived and, have steady jobs, they have their own routines, they have their own way of facing life by age 27, 28, 29, 30,
Yeah.
like, which is, the median marriage age now. Like, you have grown so much as a person that it's much more difficult for you to compromise with somebody else than it is when you're 18, 19, 20 years old.
Yeah.
And people will look at that and say, oh, they barely lived. And it's like, well, what do you mean by lived exactly? Like, gone out and got drunk with other people, one night stands. I mean, there's some
Yeah.
justification for seeing the world. And I think everybody needs to see the world at some point. But how much of the world by 27 have you seen versus 20? Like,
Yeah.
work. Have you traveled a lot by 27? Most people know. Most people by 27, what they've done is they've gone to work, they've owned a house, which I don't know if that would, necessarily qualify as seeing the world or as something that you should do by yourself all the time. But I don't think that you're appreciably living, whatever that means, that much more in the space of a decade.
And I happen to know some people who did get married young, and when they get to be about 40 or 45, they have this attitude, well, now I can have fun,
Exactly. And they're much better positioned for it.
and they're not old yet. They maybe can go travel and, not have to worry about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with the What If Alt Hist channel, but Rudyard Lynch has actually done studies, and he says, when the marriage age gets this high, there's a revolution. He says it's not sustainable either, because when the average age of marriage gets this high, and I don't know if you saw that tweet that was out by that one female who just sent it out on Christmas. She said, oh, I get to go out on Christmas and on Christmas and have a drink at a bar. I'm so lucky I don't have kids. And it's like, what you don't understand is anybody who's married or has kids has no interest in going to a freaking bar on Christmas.
They're not jealous of you.
Care.
This no longer is fun for them. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was never fun as far as I'm concerned. So I don't.
No. Well, and that was always another one of my problems. I never enjoyed drinking. I don't like the taste of it. And, that's primarily, when I was coming up, that was primarily what you did. 19, 20, well, you shouldn't say 19, but yeah.
That's part of the unfortunate aspect too, I think, of even, somewhere along the line, I don't know what happened, but when the social life became,
drinking,
getting drunk, and really you look at, I mean, here in Austin, it's actually kind of interesting. Austin is a place where you can actually find a lot of social activities for adults that aren't necessarily revolving around getting drunk.
Mm-hmm.
There aren't that many. I mean, I've always told women, who are single, join a Toastmasters club. You'll find, now granted, you'll meet married men there, but you'll usually find a good guy, and a guy who probably has a good job. And, and granted, a lot of them will be married, but you'll probably find some good men there, because it just seems like it's more men.
Yeah. Well, nightclubs have been like, because even if you think of nightclubs back in the 50s, like, it's always with a drink, but I don't know that they were drinking to get drunk, or whether they were holding their liquor better, or it was just societally not acceptable to appear that drunk. Because we still have bars and nightclubs, and I don't think there's intrinsically anything wrong with either. It's just both have gotten more and more hedonistic. Like, it's about getting drunk, and it's about that whatever's going on the dance floor is not dancing. And so we have the structures there, but the function is more toward a one-night stand than pairing people up. Like, you can't even talk to each other. It's so loud in those places.
Well, so. Yeah, that's the thing. Yeah, wherever anybody thought socializing at bars was, I mean, you can hardly talk to anybody. I want to go out to some, sometimes you can go out to meetups and stuff like that, and meet people there. It's just, and Austin has, I think that's one case where social media probably has helped, is you have Meetup, have meetup.com, and you can find people who have a common interest. And oh, I want to go out and meet up with people who, who like movies about lizards, or I want to maybe not
Tabletop board gaming. That's my thing.
What? Yeah.
Yeah, board gaming.
Yeah, board games. It's
Yeah, I like the modern ones, not Monopoly.
Yeah. I met a couple, who got together playing bridge. It's
Mm-hmm.
it's hard. Yeah, and the other thing too, it doesn't help that you used to be able to meet people at work, but you can't meet people at work anymore.
No, the downside of telework is that, yeah, but there's a lot of incentives against flirt. Well, especially for men, like flirting.
Yeah,
at
well,
work,
I was
flirting at all.
talking about I mean that's when I'm in men's groups. That's every once in a while some guy will bring up, hey, there's this woman at work that I like. She's really cute. I'm interested in, and all the men will just say, no, don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
They'll just all universally tell the guy, do not show do not express any interest in a woman at work, period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, it's too risky. Like, I understand it because I've seen even in the last 5, 6, 7 years, like I have noticed my male colleagues and bosses being much more careful with the female employees. They don't go in conference rooms with them alone. They don't go on business trips with them alone. They will not meet under any circumstances without at least one other person present.
Oh, I totally believe it. Yeah, I totally believe that. Yeah.
Yeah. So, which coming from the military, like I cannot tell you when I was in the military, the number of bare asses that I saw just in the course of my daily business being in the military and men being funny with each other. Like the idea of sexual harassment was not even on the radar because it was just like everybody understood the difference between sexual harassment and stupid pranks in the barracks. And there's no forgiveness anymore for that.
What kind of stupid pranks? I
was not the target of these pranks, so I was just the unfortunate person that wandered into the room at the wrong time and was like, why is his ass out? And they're like, it would have been funny if you were here 5 seconds earlier. I'm like, all right, I believe you. But yeah, that's just young men doing stupid stuff. And they need to be like, we need to have some societal forgiveness and understanding for various varieties of like harmless stupidity.
Yeah, there was definitely a lot more harmless stupidity back even when I was in high school. It was.
Yeah. Well, and again, cell phones. Now that harmless stupidity is recorded without context for the entire internet, so nobody dares to engage in it anymore. Which is sad.
I remember, it was this was in high school. One guy apparently they all got drunk and whatever, and his guy friends decided to give him a mohawk, so they shaved his head while he was passed out, and nobody said a word about it. It was it got nowadays. I think that would just be all hell would break loose. It's so I do think sometimes some of these pranks probably do hurt some people. There's when it becomes goes from just being pranks to bullying. It's a
but that's another question of society. Like I think we need to like have a societal reset, assuming that this can be fixed. I'm not sure that it can. Like once the cell phone camera is out of the bottle, I'm not, I don't know that we can put it back in. But even just in shaping the culture being via social media, I have given some thought to this and like a culture of charity and understanding the place of charity. And like when you see a video that looks like something, stop and ask what's the context. Or when you see a single tweet, extract it out, and everybody it's like 2 sentences. Well, where did those 2 sentences come from? What was the larger discussion going on? If we could, 1, curb our own impulses to immediately jump on things like that, and 2, sort of curb the people that are jumping on it, then we would have a more polite society. And again, this is not something government's going to fix. It's something that has to come from the culture, which means it has to come from us. But then that would loosen up real life a little bit if everybody understood they weren't going to immediately be destroyed for whatever out of context thing happened to them.
Oh, I know. Yeah. You can be destroyed over nothing anymore. It's, it's so.
Yeah. But I think there's going to be a reaction coming to it because I think people are tired of that. Nobody wants to live this way. So, because I've seen, the all discussion of cancel culture and are we going to cancel the cancelers and this, that, and the other. I think for the normie who is, observing or, only halfway aware of all this, like, I think everybody would like a little grace in matters like that. I think we've seen what happens when no grace is afforded. So I would hope that we would try to start showing it.
Well, I don't know. The problem is you have these grifters who try to make a living off of it. I mean,
Yeah.
I had a guy on a few shows ago to talk about the Duke lacrosse rape hoax,
Mm-hmm.
and it was just, you know, this is the problem. Duke and Harvard aren't going to change. They are not going to change at all. And until they change, nothing's going to change, really.
Yeah, but I mean, so not to get too far into politics, but we have seen discussions about revoking their endowments and things like that. And also just increasingly skeptical culture toward college. Like that is a thing. And, whether or not you're getting value for the amount of money that you're paying. And so, if nothing else, that incentive of fewer people wanting to go to college and the name of Harvard no longer commands the respect that it once did. So, yeah, I don't think it's going to be any great, spectacular, all at once correction, but there is a cultural shift against these institutions and questioning whether they're providing something of value or at least as much value as they charge.
Yeah, there's a lot of things going on there. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I hope it fixes it. So, I got to ask, what, I also think, this whole culture of safetyism, and I don't think we would have had the insanity, with the big bad virus without it. I think it's all tied into that.
Yeah, that's a big part of it for sure. I mean, the lack of ability to discuss it did more damage than just about anything else because when you can't discuss something, you can't get any sense of the proportion. Like looking at it, and I argued this at the time, like we are so bad at discussing secondary and tertiary effects of things, like the obvious problems that we're going to have if you lock everybody down for 2 years. And people keep trying to argue with me and say it wasn't 2 years. No, it was 2 years. Like that's how long I was teleworking. That's how long nobody was allowed to go to the grocery store where I am. We had years of people not being allowed to go anywhere. And so at the time, there were people trying to put up the flags about cancer patients not being able to go in to get screened and not being able to get treated. And people who are trying to recover from drug addiction and alcoholism and children that were locked in for years with their child abusers. Like, how many children died because they literally physically could not escape their abusers? And the inability to talk about things like that's one of the things that makes me angriest is that, when we're not allowed to talk, we can't discuss these issues to say which is the genuine danger here, which is going to cost more lives in the long run. Because I don't believe that when the final numbers are known, I don't think the unspecified virus of unknown origin was more dangerous than the effects on society.
Well, you can't have intelligent conversations when the people aren't intelligent. I mean, it's that.
There's some of that, but you have to be allowed to talk, period. There's always going to, we can't plan our lives for the stupidest. Like, we can't shape society around the stupidest.
But stupid isn't this. Well, yeah, but I guess I just have a lower opinion of society than you do.
Yeah. Oh, in some, yeah.
Because even the average is stupid anymore. It's, and you can't expect, and you have to be intelligent to appreciate the value of free and open debate too. I don't know how you can. Everything that happened in 2020, it says nothing good about our species. It really doesn't. But anyway, that's I gotta ask, what do you think about Andrew Tate?
I do not have a high opinion of him. I've never followed him or watched his videos directly. It's always been presented to me secondhand. There is a YouTuber I followed that did a pretty good job of breaking his stuff down. And I think he's filling a gap that young men particularly need some sort of model of the world. I don't think he should be it. I do think he's being persecuted beyond. Well, let me say this very carefully because I don't have a deep knowledge of the case. I know he's done some appalling things that are probably not illegal, and he's being prosecuted in excess of those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, but what he's done is still pretty ugly and inexcusable, even if it's not expressly illegal.
I think he's I think he's the logical response to what's happening right now. Unfortunately, I don't think he would have been a phenomena 50 years ago or even 20 years ago. I can also say he really is very good at telling stories, whether the stories are true or not. He'll kind of like they're fables, you know. He's got a gift for that. It's
self-aggrandizing.
I don't know. Yeah, I think probably most of what he's doing is a grift, but you know, and there's so much of this I don't care attitude that I think just a lot of, you know, and you know, to their credit, almost all of these guys like that completely were saying from day one that COVID was a scam.
Yeah.
Which it was, but you know, it's I don't know if there's any other great works you want to mention before we go. I think we've had a pretty good show here.
Yeah, in terms of like for others
fiction,
to read or
books,
admire.
books or movies or, you know, anything else. I don't know if there's anything else because you sound like you've got a pretty eclectic things you've read there. You know, a list of things you've read and seen there.
Yeah, the one that most pops to mind is, and speaking of civilization, is Children of Time by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Just recently read that series. And that one is about, have you read it?
No, I've not heard of that one. Children of Time.
Yeah, Adrian Tchaikovsky, like the guy that wrote the Nutcracker. And so he takes spiders and builds it, has them evolve a civilization over time.
Yep.
And like how they would evolve it versus humans evolved it. And it's fascinating and really imaginative, and also a couple of places really inspiring and touching. Like, reaching for the stars.
Have you ever seen the movie Moonrise Kingdom?
No, sorry.
What's that? You know, as far as romance is concerned, that movie will make anybody believe in love.
Oh.
And it's really and it might, and it's definitely, and it's also got some really good music in the background. But
yeah,
go
ahead.
I have to admit, I kind of like romantic comedies that are about kids, which is. Yeah, I'm also a big fan of 10 Things I Hate About You is another high school romance rom-com, but that's a hilarious movie. I could watch that movie a million times too.
Yeah, no, and I do like I was trying to think of some of my favorite romances, and Pride and Prejudice and Sense and Sensibility are two good ones, which if you want like a masculine admirable adult hero, then Colonel Brandon. That's the character that Alan Rickman played in Sense and Sensibility. There you go. And then you've got Wickham as the cad.
I also forgot to ask about this. I will admit I read the first book myself.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, it's not the phenomenon it used to be, but what do you think about 50 Shades?
Oh, Lord. I read it just because I wanted to see what the fuss was about.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to take off my writer hat for things like that. But also, like, I mean, it was, should I badmouth other authors? I have a real hard time understanding that phenomenon, because if that's what you want, there's better out there. So, I mean, I'll leave it at that. I have a hard time understanding that phenomenon.
I honestly can't think of a story that had two more unlikable characters than those two.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. I came out of that novel thinking, this is a pathetic loser who tries to impress a woman by throwing money around. But otherwise, I mean, really, that's maybe it's harsh, but that's how I see it.
No, he's a red flag stalker.
Yeah,
like on every level.
And she is a gold digger, but doesn't want to admit it.
Yeah, well, and also very self-insert, like that. And both that and Twilight, the female characters are very blank and ill-defined, specifically so the reader can easily insert themselves into their shoes. And that is a trend in romance novels, is to have a very undefined and like moldable female character, so that the female reader can put herself in that character's shoes. Her likes, her dislikes, her voice, it's all very forgettable.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
by design.
yeah, I guess so. So maybe, for example, you write a novel, you don't necessarily say she's blonde or redhead. So that
Exactly.
way, any blonde, brunette, or redhead can put herself into the woman's shoes. I never
Yeah.
thought about that, but
Yeah.
so so with my novel, I've already kind of thrown out a lot of girls because I wrote about a girl who's good at math and
hmm
girls who aren't good at math, and yet the whole point is, well, I want girls to read this and say, yes, I can be good at math.
Yeah. I have so much, and it's like to veer off into that discussion a little bit. I have so much trouble with that discussion at all, because even the idea of girls and math has been politicized. Like, whether we like it, whether we don't. I personally despised math when I was in high school. And even when I try to tell people that, they're like, oh, well, it's not you don't like math. It's that your teachers didn't want to teach it to you because you're a girl. I'm like, no, my male teacher stayed after school with me to try to help me with math. And he did everything he could. I just hate math. Can I please be allowed to like or dislike math despite my gender? Um, that annoys the hell out of me that that's
I,
even a discussion. Like, I totally understand why you're bringing it up, and I did the same thing with my heroine, who is good at math. But the fact that it's so prevalent and such a meme is so ridiculous.
well, I think it's more because I just wish there would have been more of them.
Yeah. But I think it's okay if girls are not naturally predisposed to like math. Like, I think it's possible that that is a thing. I'm probably going to get crucified on Twitter for saying it. But I think it's possible that we as genders, we have different interests.
Yes.
And, there's going to be some women that do like math. There's a certain percentage out of the minority and that's fine if they do pursue it, go, but there's going to be certain things that most women are not interested in, and certain things like romance that more women are interested in. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I agree. It's the fact, of letting girls be girls and letting boys be boys, and
Yeah. And not trying to force it either way. Like,
yeah, but I also think, you don't want to get to a point where you're pedestalizing them just because they're girls, and sometimes that makes them uncomfortable, and girls are less likely to get involved with it. Where if you just accepted them as they are, don't constantly talk about the fact that they're boys or girls. Just
yeah. No, and I've gotten more of that as a girl gamer. Like, I like playing video games. And I have never, maybe one time in my entire time of playing video games, have I ever been like abused for being a girl. 9 times out of 10, I'm instantly showered with, rifles, free rifles from this server admin. Like, as soon as they hear a female voice, they're like, here's a car, here's a rifle, here's a this, here's a that. And like, same thing, I just want to play the game. But I've never been abused for it. I've always, 9 times out of 10, it's been something like, oh, welcome, come over here, join us.
Yeah, it's well, this has been a good conversation about things. I hope it works out and you're working on your series. How long is your novel, by the way? It's
They're lengthy. So the first one is 150,000 words, which works out to 394 pages on Amazon.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So not short.
True novel, right? If you write novels, you only think in terms of words. That's, you could have broken that up into 2 or 3 novels if you wanted to, but anyway.
Yeah, well, there's a lot more. The next one is like 177,000 words, so they don't get any shorter.
Yeah, but I was always told 50,000 usually works for a novel, but it's to each his own.
Yeah, well, and fantasy is usually a lot longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, so depends on the genre.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, I think sometimes I wrote my novel is also middle grade sci-fi dystopian stuff, so if you know what I mean by middle grade.
Yeah.
9. I always say 9 to 14. So.
Yeah. That's good. We need more books of that age. My brother had the hardest time finding books when we were growing up. Just the ones that were being written were not of interest to him.
I think, boys don't read that much anyway. Unfortunately, it's and it doesn't help that what boys are given to read. I mean.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, we had a family of readers, so all of us read for fun. And his problem was just, finding something he was interested in.
Well, what they give to people in school doesn't help, and what they for example, when I was when I was growing up, Little House on the Prairie was on TV, and I appreciate how wonderful a show that is now. But I remember now, it's all girls. That was kind of why I turned my nose up at it. When it first started, because it was all about girls. Because they were mom and dad with 3 daughters. There were no boys on the show. And
Yeah.
But now I can look back and really appreciate it for other reasons. But it's a there weren't, and I think they're probably just not writing as many books for boys, unfortunately, because they're just.
No, I'm trying to think of the last major. I mean, Harry Potter, obviously.
Yeah.
Male protagonist could be fun for boys to read, but I'm trying to think of any other well-known series.
And like sometimes, when after my nephew got older, I gave him a book about Michael Jordan once. I gave him Ric Flair's biography. He's that age. Well, here's a book he might read. He's a boy. There aren't that many.
Yeah.
And I'm afraid they don't even really try to market books to boys. Hardly, it seems they don't.
No.
Which is kind of sad. And sometimes boys will read books just because they're so funny. Just. One thing else I realized too is that now that I realized that A Farewell to Arms by Hemingway is now in the public domain, which is a book we had to read in high school, and said, what should I do to disgrace that book? I'd like to. Disrespect it. You hate Hemingway, is that right?
Yeah, time for revenge.
Oh, thank you. Oh,
No, I'm convinced that a lot of the public school, the goal is to make people not like reading.
Yeah, that's also kind of what got me into Ayn Rand, sort of. It's like, well, if all these literary experts hate her so much, she's got to be pretty good.
Yeah, I've read Anthem. That was required, and I liked it. That was required reading. You go through the dystopian cycle when you're in 14, 15, 16 years old. So I liked Anthem, and then I went on to read Atlas Shrugged. I don't think have I read The Fountainhead? If I have, it's been a long time.
Yeah, Atlas Shrugged. Yeah, well,
which I actually like that one.
Yeah, it's you liked it, but you weren't knocked on your ass by it, which I find interesting. So many people I read. What did you like about Atlas Shrugged?
So so I do like the characters. I like the technology, the sort of Art Deco, Art Nouveau, that sort of world that, or at least that's how I imagine it, is set in that Art Deco, Art Nouveau time. And so the idea of the technology of that time and Reardon, especially with the steel, because that is, as a child of 80s and 90s, that's essential industry. That's still raw mechanical, that's something real versus, being a project manager in terms of a job. I think a lot of our sort of industrial problems now is the lack of industry. We don't see any tangible results of our efforts. And so that world, that part of her world, and the train on Reardon Steel, and I'm very vaguely remembering this, but that was so compelling to me in terms of world building.
Yeah.
And then I liked him, and I can't remember the female protagonist's name, but I liked them together. Dagny Taggart. Yeah, I like them together. And also the frustration. I like the mundane evil. That was one of my favorite parts of it, is it wasn't people explicitly nobody was trying to start a war or genocide. It was just the mundane bureaucracy dragging everybody else down.
Yeah.
That made an impression on me.
That's one thing too, is if you've been in the military, you really learn to hate bureaucrats, from what I've heard.
Yes.
That was one thing I always thought was, looking back about MASH, it was always funny, is the way they'd portray all these bureaucrats. It's you'd always have to fill out all these forms and all that stuff, and
nothing will poison you against government-run anything like the VA. Speaking as a sufferer of the VA, the Veterans Administration Hospital, etc. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. So, well, I've not dealt that much with the VA, but certainly has some pluses and minuses. But yes.
Well, if you're talking about bureaucracy and just mind-bogglingly stupid, self-destructive bureaucratic decisions, that's the VA.
Yeah, did you get hurt or anything, or what did you see in the service?
So I was Air Force, when
Yeah.
I enlisted in 2002, I enlisted after 9/11. My father convinced me that I would fit in better in the Air Force because I was not a drinker, and yeah. So I got out injured because basically we were overworked. Like we had a certain number of people on paper, and that was not the number of people that we had working in reality for various reasons. And so a bunch of us got hurt on the job and ended up getting medically discharged.
Oh,
Yeah. But then as a civilian, I went to work for the Marine Corps and deployed with them in 2008 to 2009. So I was inside the wire. I was doing, I was in charge of the tactical gear in Anbar province. And so I basically flew to the Marine bases there and just made sure that everybody had all the tactical gear that they needed.
oh, do you fly?
No, I did not fly myself.
Okay.
They flew me on Ospreys, which was really cool.
Was it? It's really, how serious was the injury? If you don't mind me asking, was it?
A knee injury.
Okay, so
Yeah.
are you back to normal or?
No, permanently disabled.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So that gave me a deep hatred for bureaucracy. Yes, because and the circumstances that hurt all of us, because it's when I went in the military, I went in for a specific purpose, and you want to go and you make a difference in this, that, and the other, and I was doing really well with my career at the time. But we had some people that didn't want to do their job, and so they left it to the rest of us. And so one of my friends, he got his back injured, and then another girl, it was her ankle. And so all three of us were done, career over, permanent disability, because other people couldn't do their job and or didn't want to do their job, and for various reasons they could not be forced.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, that might be good for another conversation, but yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole big thing.
Yeah, it's always so.
Yeah.
Well, with stem cells and stuff, I wonder if they'll be, replacing knees and stuff like that soon enough. It's really amazing what we're still able to do.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so we can find you at melissajcave.com. Is that right? Or
Yep. Yeah, that is my website, and then I'm mostly social media wise. I'm on X.
Yeah, and anywhere else we can find you?
So I'm on Instagram, and that's mostly going to be book related stuff. So Instagram or Twitter, I talk more. X.
Yes.
I talk more freely. Instagram is going to be mostly book related stuff.
Okay, well, please go buy my novel, Escape from the Village, and go check out my Substack. Go like this video, subscribe to the channel, go to Buy Me a Coffee to support the forum. And thank you, Melissa Cave. We're out. Buy my novel, Escape from the Village, from major booksellers online. Go to escapevillage.com. Subscribe to the Substack. Go to fountainheadforum.substack.com. Support the forum. Go to buymeacoffee.com/fountainheadforum. Thank you.